Everyone says I'm lucky. Darnell, the young heir of a wealthy family, is head over heels for me. He pursued me relentlessly for 3 years, and on the night I finally agreed to be his girlfriend, he set off fireworks across the entire city, making a grand spectacle. Darnell has always been a free spirit, the kind of person everyone gravitates toward. No one had ever seen him truly care for someone before. But after we got together, he stopped going to bars and hanging out with his old friends. He had promised me that he would devote himself entirely to me. So, every day, he came home early to spend time with me. Everyone was betting on how long it would take for him to grow tired of our relationship, but for 3 years, he treated me with unwavering kindness. Last month, he even proposed. We've been together for so long. Everyone thought we were destined to be together, and so did I. But then, out of nowhere, he broke up with me. It was 2 weeks ago, on a morning like any other. I tied Darnell's tie and planted a kiss on his cheek. I smiled softly, "Go to work, now." As usual, Darnell kissed me back on the cheek. Then, casually, he said, "Let's break up." His tone was so nonchalant, as if he were commenting on the weather. I froze, thinking I must have misheard him. "What? Are you joking?" Darnell repeated himself, this time with complete seriousness. "Why?" This time, there was a hint of tenderness in his voice, but it wasn't directed at me. It was for someone else. I've fallen for someone else. She's different from you, lively, like a flame. I couldn't bear to hear more. Enough. Do you remember your promise? You said you'd love me forever, that you'd never betray me. Darnell laughed, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Natalie, how can you be so naive? You actually believed a man's words? Over the 3 years we were together, Darnell had gradually taken over his family's business. He had shed his youthful recklessness and become decisive and commanding. There was an air of nobility in his every move, making him stand out in any crowd. And now, that decisiveness was turned against me. With those words, Darnell left and never returned to our home. Looking back, the signs of his infidelity were there all along. Not long ago, he started staying out all night, his clothes carrying the scent of another woman's perfume. It was as if he was slowly reverting to his old, carefree playboy self. I had suspected his unfaithfulness. But for 3 years, he had played the role of the reformed man so convincingly. He had even proposed to me just a month ago. I told myself that his change in behavior was due to his growing career and increased social obligations. But in the end, it was all self-deception. 2 days later, Darnell's lawyer came to me with a thick stack of documents. Mr. Darnell said that since you've been with him for 3 years, he won't let you leave empty-handed. If you sign here, the villa you're living in and a settlement of $30 million will be yours. I muttered in despair, typical of him. A few days later, paparazzi caught Darnell bidding millions for a pink diamond, which he gifted to the famous actress Sabina. When reporters asked Darnell about his relationship with Sabina, his eyes lit up with amusement. "We're just friends for now." "Oh," the reporter said suggestively, "rumors say you're very devoted to your girlfriend. Aren't you worried your fiancé might be upset?" Darnell paused for a moment before replying, "We've already broken up." That's just how Darnell is. When he loves someone, he's all in, making grand gestures. The comments under the news were filled with blessings. Finally, he's broken up with that ice-cold fiancé of his. He and Sabina are a much better match. No kidding, Natalie's family has fallen from grace. She's no match for Darnell. When I saw the reports, I completely lost hope in Darnell and signed the separation agreement. After that, I called my violin teacher, Enoch. "Mr. Enoch, is your friend's orchestra still looking for members? We've been waiting for you. Weren't you reluctant to leave Darnell before?" He had recognized my talent and had repeatedly invited me to join his friend's orchestra, but I had always declined, unwilling to leave Darnell. We'd broken up. He wasn't surprised. "Good. That man was no good for you, and he was holding back your career. I know plenty of talented young men here, younger and more handsome than him. I'll introduce you when you come." His cheerful tone lifted my spirits, and I agreed. Leaving Darnell made me realize how vast my world could be. After planning my future, I finally had a good night's sleep for the first time since Darnell broke up with me. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a news notification. Last night, Darnell had celebrated Sabina's birthday with fireworks across the city, just as grand as before. Later, Darnell and Sabina were seen entering a hotel together and never came out. In the photos, Darnell looked carefree and radiant, his gaze filled with tenderness as he looked at Sabina. He had always refused to carry my bag, but in the picture, he was casually holding a woman's handbag. Even though I had resolved to move on, tears still filled my eyes. The fireworks were dazzling, but like Darnell's love for me, they were fleeting. I pulled myself together and headed to the airport. Life is unpredictable. Just when I thought I was starting a new chapter, I was kidnapped on the way to the airport. When I woke up, my hands and feet were tightly bound, my mouth gagged, and I was at the edge of a cliff. The sea wind was harsh, biting into my skin. One of the kidnappers, seeing I was awake, called Darnell. "Darnell, right? Your fiancée is with us. If you want her alive, bring us 50 million in cash." On the other end, Darnell was unmoved. "Natalie, is this some kind of act to force me back?" He hung up without a second thought. The hope in my eyes, which had sparked when he answered the call, dimmed as he coldly ended it. Darnell thought this was all a ploy to drag him back from Sabina's bed. The kidnapper was stunned. I thought Darnell was crazy about his wife. Why is he acting like this? "Boss, did we grab the wrong person?" The man with a scarred face frowned. "No, this is definitely Darnell's fiancée, Natalie." They weren't completely clueless. After checking online, they quickly figured out the truth. Damn it. That scumbag changed his mind, and now we've got the wrong person. The scarred man said, "Lee, call Darnell on video." That jerk's moved on. He's probably still in bed with another woman. A video call won't change anything. The scarred man gritted his teeth. They were together for 3 years. I don't believe Darnell would really abandon her. Again, Lee called Darnell, but he hung up. He called again, and again, Darnell hung up. On the third try, Darnell finally answered, his expression annoyed. "Natalie, are you still at it? Can't you stop with this act?" His hair was disheveled, his shirt slightly open, revealing love bites on his collarbone, as if someone had staked their claim. The background was a hotel room, with clothes scattered on the bed. Someone whispered something in his ear, and his tone softened. "Be good, I'll be done soon." The camera angle was narrow, so I couldn't see the person beside him, but I noticed a small red mole on her ear. It was Sabina. In this life-threatening situation, it didn't matter who Darnell was with. I just hoped that, for the sake of our 3 years together, he would believe me this once and save me. Lee pushed me to the edge of the cliff. "We're real kidnappers, not actors. Transfer 50 million to our account, or we'll make sure your woman dies a gruesome death." Darnell's brow furrowed, but then he laughed. "Natalie, where did you find these actors? They're really committed to the act." This angered the kidnapper, who pushed me even closer to the edge. "I told you, we're not actors. This isn't a game." The sea wind whipped around us, and I felt like a bird caught in a storm, teetering on the brink of falling. Tears welled up in my eyes as I pleaded with Darnell, shaking my head desperately. "I'm not acting. Please, believe me just this once. I'm still young. I have a future ahead of me. I don't want to die in the cold, dark sea." Darnell's eyes were filled with disgust. "Natalie, you're such a good actress. It's a shame you're not in the movies." The kidnapper grew even angrier. "Do you believe me now? Should I really throw her into the sea?" Darnell sneered. "Go ahead. Don't just talk about it." The scarred man realized that Darnell truly no longer cared for me. They weren't going to get any ransom from him. He signaled Lee to hang up and let me go. They were after money, not a life. But Lee was too enraged by Darnell's words. "You asked for it. Don't regret it." In the next moment, Lee pushed me off the cliff. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Darnell's mocking smile turn to shock, his eyes wide with disbelief. In the air, I heard his desperate scream, "Natalie." Or maybe it was just my imagination. I plunged into the sea. Every part of my body felt shattered, the pain unbearable. The water was so cold. As I sank, my vision darkened. The air in my lungs grew thin, and I lost consciousness. When I woke up again, I was in a hospital, my body wrapped tightly like a mummy. Beside me sat a handsome man. He was reading a book, his demeanor calm. My movement caught his attention. "You're finally awake." His composed expression softened slightly. I asked, "Who are you?" The man was taken aback. "You don't remember me?" I tried to recall, but my mind was blank. The more I tried, the more my head hurt. The man took my hand, his voice gentle. "Natalie, it's okay if you can't remember. Just know that I'm your boyfriend, and that's enough." "My boyfriend?" The man saw the doubt in my eyes and spoke firmly. "Yes, I'm your boyfriend." The man introduced himself as Otis. He showed me photos of us together. In the pictures, a young couple smiled brightly at the camera. The man before me was taller than the boy in the photo, his shoulders broader, his face more mature and defined. His overall demeanor hadn't changed much, he still gave off a clean, serene vibe. But his eyes were deep and inscrutable. When he looked at me, though, his gaze was filled with tenderness. Otis gave me a strange, contradictory feeling. He told me I had fallen into the sea by accident and that he had saved me. He also said that my family had passed away and that I lived with him. I was puzzled. "Why are all these photos from years ago?" "Because I was in a car accident and was in a coma for several years. During that time, you never left my side," Otis said softly. "Now, it's my turn to take care of you." His simple words felt like the most beautiful love poem, and my ears grew warm. "It must have been hard for you." Otis leaned down and gently hugged me. "You've been through more than I have. If I could, I'd take your pain for you." His cool, refreshing scent enveloped me, and I realized I didn't feel the slightest bit of discomfort in his embrace. My body relaxed completely, and my cheek instinctively nuzzled against his. I began to believe that he really was my boyfriend. After I woke up, Otis stayed by my side constantly, as if I were some precious treasure he had recovered. "Don't you have a job?" Otis smiled. "My most important job is taking care of you," he said as he peeled an apple for me. "Also, you used to call me Otis." I thought calling him by his first name would feel awkward. But when I said it, it felt natural and intimate, as if it had always been that way. I must have called him that before. Over time, as my body slowly recovered, I began rehabilitation. That's when I understood what Otis meant by, "I've been through more than you." Rehabilitation wasn't just hard, it was agonizing, even despairing at times. It felt like walking through a dark tunnel with no end in sight. But Otis was always there, a guiding light urging me forward. After countless failures, I felt hopeless and even resented him for his constant encouragement. One day, after falling during a session, I stayed on the ground, refusing to get up. When Otis tried to encourage me, anger and frustration overwhelmed me. Otis didn't understand how much pain I was in. All he could say was, "You'll get better." I'd been through this too. In a fit of rage, I bit his arm. My teeth sank into his flesh, and for a moment, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. Only when I tasted blood did I realize what I had done. I apologized profusely, but Otis simply kissed away my tears. "Because you're Natalie, you can do anything to me." His eyes were filled with forgiveness, as if no matter how badly I treated him, it was okay. Filled with guilt, I pushed myself even harder in my rehabilitation, for both our sakes. A year passed. Finally, I could walk and run like a normal person. On the day I was discharged, Otis proposed to me. Of course, I said yes. I moved back into the home we had shared. As soon as I entered, the staff greeted me warmly and familiarly. "Welcome home, miss. We're so glad you're okay. We've been worried about your health." Their faces were unfamiliar, and the house felt foreign to me. I even had to ask the staff where the bathroom was. I told myself this was normal. After all, I had lost my memory. Though the house felt unfamiliar, the decor was exactly to my taste, I must have arranged it myself. The staff also knew my preferences, remembering what I liked to eat and what I didn't. But when I entered the walk-in closet, a strange feeling crept over me again. The spacious closet was mostly filled with my clothes, with only a small section for Otis's. But all my clothes still had their tags on, they were brand new. There was no trace of my past life here. "Do you like these clothes? I had my secretary buy them in your size," Otis said, appearing behind me unexpectedly. "Where are my old clothes?" Otis replied, I donated them. You always liked wearing the latest styles. You never kept out-of-season clothes. I wondered if I had really been that wasteful. Don't you like them? I can take you shopping tomorrow to pick out new ones. Looking into Otis's gentle, caring eyes, my doubts melted away, replaced by guilt. He had always been so good to me. Even if my parents were still alive, they couldn't have treated me better. I shouldn't have doubted him. I'm sorry. Otis guessed what I was thinking. He hugged me gently. His voice was soft as he spoke. It's okay. You've lost your memory. It's normal to feel sensitive. With my cheek against his chest, I could hear his heartbeat, steady and reassuring. 6 months later, Otis and I got married. I had no family, and Otis wasn't close to his either. In all the time we'd been together, he had never mentioned his parents. He didn't bring them up, and I didn't ask. So, we decided to have a destination wedding. Otis was a gentle man, except in the bedroom. His calm eyes hid an undercurrent of possessiveness. When I looked at him, he would kiss my tear-stained eyelids. Don't look. This side of me is ugly. But Otis was still Otis, even if he had stepped down from his pedestal and into the mundane world. I didn't dislike this side of him. After all, I wasn't the only one who found joy in it. Life after marriage with Otis was peaceful and happy. Otis had started a company, and his work was sometimes busy, sometimes relaxed. As for me, it seemed I had a natural talent for music before losing my memory. With the help of a violin teacher Otis hired, I picked up the instrument again. Later, I joined an orchestra. A year into our marriage, we welcomed a lovely daughter, Elaine. Our little family of 3 was full of joy. But 2 years later, Otis's father fell seriously ill, and he had to return home that very night. I could tell Otis didn't want me to go with him, but he also didn't want to leave me alone. He was terrified of being apart from me for too long. The accident I had been through seemed to have left a deep scar on him. He was afraid of losing me. Since the accident and my memory loss, we had never been apart for more than 2 days. When I traveled with the orchestra for performances, he would accompany me. When he went on business trips, he would take me along. Every time I finished work, Otis would always be there to pick me up, right on time. My colleagues often teased, "Your husband is such a clingy sweetheart." In the end, Otis decided to take Elaine and me with him when he returned home. As the plane landed, the momentary weightlessness left me feeling uneasy, as if something was about to spiral out of control. At the airport, Elaine wanted ice cream, so I took her to get some while Otis went to collect our luggage. When I returned with Elaine, I saw Otis talking to a young man. I recognized him. It was Otis's younger brother, Darnell. Just before we left, Otis had shown me his family photo album and introduced me to his relatives. He had specifically asked me if Darnell looked familiar. I shook my head. Is he important to me? Otis closed the album and said casually, "He's nobody important. Just stay away from him. He's not a good person." Now, Darnell was smiling and saying, "Brother, you've finally come back." Otis's tone, however, was cold. "Why are you the one picking us up?" I thought to myself, Otis really doesn't get along with his family. Given Otis's gentle nature, it must be his family who had wronged him. This made me feel a bit hostile toward Darnell, even though I had only just met him. I walked over to Otis. Darnell, who had been chatting with Otis, suddenly froze when he saw me. His expression shifted from disbelief to something more emotional, his eyes reddening. "Natalie, I knew you were still alive." But when he noticed me holding Otis's hand and leading a little girl, his face darkened. "Who are they to you?" I was confused by the stranger's tone. "Do we know each other?" It felt strange, as if he were accusing Otis of being my secret lover. "You don't remember me?" Otis answered for me. "A few years ago, Natalie had an accident and lost her memory." "Shut up. I wasn't talking to you." I frowned. Otis was his older brother. How could Darnell speak to him like that? No wonder Otis rarely came back. "Darnell isn't usually like this," Otis said apologetically. "He must be having a bad day." Even now, Otis was defending his brother. But the way Darnell glared at him, full of resentment, showed that his brother didn't appreciate it at all. I felt sorry for Otis. Just then, Elaine spoke up. Daddy, hug, hug. Her voice seemed to strike Darnell like a thunderbolt. The worst possible scenario had just been confirmed. Furious, Darnell's face twisted into something terrifying. He grabbed Otis by the collar and punched him. Otis stumbled back, caught off guard. A bright red mark appeared on his handsome face. Darnell moved to strike again, but I stepped in front of Otis. "What's wrong with you? Are you insane? You're yelling at me for him?" Darnell looked both shocked and hurt. I was even more convinced he was crazy. Otis was my husband. Why wouldn't I defend him? Then, Darnell looked at Otis behind me and seemed to realize something. He accused, "Otis, you could have blocked that. Why didn't you? You let me hit you on purpose, so Natalie would feel sorry for you and hate me, didn't you?" He gritted his teeth. "You're such a hypocrite." Darnell was the one causing trouble, yet he was turning it around on Otis. I finally understood what it meant to twist the truth. I turned away from Darnell and took out a handkerchief, gently wiping the blood from Otis's lips. "Let's get you to a doctor later. It's just a small injury." "It's fine." "It's not fine. You're wincing in pain." Otis smiled helplessly. "I've worried you." Beside us, Darnell's teeth were clenched so hard I could hear them grinding. Otis glanced at him and took my hand. "Natalie, go sit down for a bit. I need to talk to Darnell." "After what he did to you, what is there to talk about?" Otis lowered his eyes and sighed. "He's still my brother. If you really thought of me as your brother, you wouldn't have." Otis lifted his gaze and gave Darnell a calm look. Darnell seemed to choke on his words, as if an invisible hand had gripped his throat. Later, I don't know what Otis said to Darnell, but he left looking utterly defeated, on the verge of tears. In the car, I asked Otis, "What was my relationship with your brother? He seemed really upset to see me with you. He had a crush on you. He didn't expect me to marry you and have a child without telling him." I thought about his violent outburst earlier and frowned. "Even if I weren't with you, there's no way I'd ever be with someone like him." "Exactly. A scoundrel like him doesn't deserve you." Otis's tone was unusually sharp, a rare display of aggression from someone so gentle. After Otis settled Elaine and me in, he went alone to see his ailing father. I felt uneasy. "I'm your wife. Shouldn't I go with you to see your father?" Otis replied calmly, "The doctor said he needs rest after surgery. I'll take you to see him once he's better." That made sense, so I agreed. Before leaving, Otis kissed my forehead. "Wait for me." As I prepared for bed, I couldn't help but think about Darnell's emotional outburst at the airport. Something told me our relationship wasn't as simple as him having a crush on me. I took out my tablet and searched for information about Darnell online. He was a well-known playboy in the city, often linked to a celebrity named Sabina. According to the news, he had once been engaged but broke it off for Sabina. Later, for some reason, he and Sabina also broke up. Sabina came from a good family and pursued acting as a hobby. She had been chasing Darnell for years, creating a toxic relationship. As for Darnell's former fiancée, there was no personal information about her online, as if it had been deliberately erased. I put down my phone, feeling even more disgusted by Darnell. So, he's just a scoundrel. At the airport, he acted all heartbroken when he found out I was married. How ridiculous. Just then, my phone rang. It was Otis. "What are you doing?" His usually gentle voice sounded slightly distorted over the phone. I glanced at the tablet, which still displayed Darnell's scandalous news. "I'm reading." For some reason, I instinctively hid the fact that I had been searching for news about Darnell. A gut feeling told me it was better not to mention it to Otis. Otis gently reminded me, "Don't read for too long. It's bad for your eyes." "Did you get the cut on your lip treated at the hospital?" "Yes, I did." "Don't lie to me." "I'll check when you get back." Otis chuckled. "All right. I'll be staying at the hospital tonight. Go to sleep without me." In the middle of the night, I was awakened by noise downstairs. I threw on a robe and went down to find someone knocking at the door. The staff stood by, watching but not opening it. "Who's there?" "It's Darnell." As soon as the words were spoken, Darnell's voice came from outside. "Open the door." I need to talk to Natalie. It's important. Darnell's voice was slurred, as if he'd been drinking. He kept pounding on the door, shouting loudly. Through the doorbell camera, I saw the neighbors across the street come out to see what was happening. Let him in, I said. The staff hesitated. Sir instructed us not to let anyone in to disturb you except him. I frowned. If Darnell keeps making a scene, the whole neighborhood will wake up. The staff remained firm. We've called security, but there's a leak in the complex due to the heavy rain. They're fixing it and will be here soon. When I tried to argue, they added, Madam, Sir is only concerned for your safety. He's drunk and not in his right mind. Who knows what he might do? I understood their reasoning, but it still made me uncomfortable. Otis cared about my safety, but with the staff here, what harm could a drunk Darnell possibly do? Besides, we had no grudge between us. He had no reason to hurt me. For a moment, I felt suffocated. I was like a bird in a cage, well cared for and safe, thinking I was happy. But when the bird wanted to see the world outside, it realized it had no freedom. I knew I shouldn't think so poorly of Otis. After all, he had always been so good to me. Yet, the thought lingered, growing like a seed taking root, its vines twisting around my heart, causing a dull ache. Suddenly, I felt rebellious. If you won't open it, I will. I pushed past the staff and opened the door. Darnell, caught off guard, stumbled in, still in the middle of knocking. It was pouring outside. He was drenched, his clothes muddy, as if he'd fallen. He looked even more pitiful than he had earlier, like a drowned dog. When Darnell saw me, his eyes lit up. Natalie, you finally agreed to see me. I need to tell you, your husband is no good. I took a subtle step back. You came here in the middle of the night, drunk, just to badmouth Otis? No, your husband is really no good. He's a complete liar. He's been. Enough. A cold, icy voice cut through the air. Otis had returned. Weren't you supposed to be at the hospital with father? Is this why you came here behind my back, to turn Natalie against me? Otis's expression was dark as he slowly rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong, clean forearms. In the next moment, he grabbed Darnell by the collar. The fabric tightened around Darnell's throat, cutting off his air. He gasped like a fish out of water, his face turning red as he weakly struggled against Otis's grip. Otis's face was calm, as if he were looking at a dead fish. He twisted his wrist slightly and punched Darnell in the face. Again and again. Darnell's face was soon covered in blood, but Otis didn't stop. This was the first time I had seen this side of Otis. Dark, violent, and utterly detached. The staff were too intimidated by his cold aura to intervene. When I finally snapped out of my shock, I shouted, "Stop. You're going to kill him." Otis froze, as if someone had hit pause. He turned to me, his expression softening. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." His voice was as gentle as ever. But I felt a pang of fear and confusion. How could someone switch between cruelty and tenderness so effortlessly? Did I really know the man I shared a bed with? Otis dragged Darnell outside. The door closed behind them. His cold voice drifted in faintly. "I've wanted to do this for 5 years. Darnell, don't push your luck. If there's a next time." The rest of his words were lost in the wind. After the commotion, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the couch by the window, feeling lost. Otis took a shower, washing away the blood and leaving only the scent of the shower gel I liked. Then he came to sit beside me. "Why aren't you asleep?" I countered, "What about you? Weren't you supposed to be with your father? Why did you come back?" "Because of the thunder." I was terrified of thunderstorms. He had come back for me. The anger I had been feeling earlier, like a pufferfish ready to burst, slowly deflated at his words. I sighed. "Otis, I feel like I've never really known the real you. Did I scare you earlier?" Otis looked at me. "Natalie, the person you know is the real me. Because I care about you, I hide my darker side and try to show you the best parts of myself. But if someone tries to come between us, I won't hesitate to use less peaceful methods to deal with it." Otis's expression was sincere. His beautiful eyes reflected only me. Everyone wants to show their best side to the person they love. Maybe he wasn't so wrong after all. Darnell added, "You don't have to be afraid. No matter who I am, I'll always love you and never hurt you. Our relationship won't change because of me." My anger dissipated a little more. Then what was Darnell talking about? He said you were hiding something from me. I don't know. I widened my eyes. You don't know, and you still hit him? He was going to badmouth me and ruin our relationship. Otis's cool fingers brushed my cheek, sending a shiver down my spine. You saw it today, I'm not a good person. I'm only good when I'm with you. You, mm. Before I could say more, Otis's lips silenced me. It's such a beautiful night. Let's not waste it on that nuisance. Okay, Natalie? His voice was husky, and the way he said my name was filled with an indescribable tenderness, as if I were caught in a sweet, sticky web. Lost in his gentle assault, my mind turned to mush, unable to think. I only vaguely remember Otis picking me up, kissing me as he drew the half-open curtains. Through the heavy rain, I thought I saw someone standing outside. But maybe I was mistaken. What fool would be out in the rain in the middle of the night? When Otis's father was moved out of the intensive care unit, Otis took Elaine and me to meet his parents. At first, the elderly couple seemed a bit uneasy around me, but as they grew more familiar, their attitude toward Elaine and me softened. His mother, in particular, even took off the bracelet she was wearing and placed it on my wrist. It was said to be a family heirloom, passed down to the next generation's daughter-in-law. Otis has always been cold and independent since he was a child. We never had to worry about him, but we were afraid he might end up alone. With you by his side, we feel at ease. Before we left, I saw Darnell. His face was covered in bruises, his handsome features now a mess. He walked with a slight limp. That night, Otis had really done a number on him. At that moment, Elaine was fussing for water, so Otis took her to get some. I had gone to the restroom, so neither of them was with me. I called out to Darnell. His eyes lit up. That night, you said Otis was hiding something important from me. What was it? After all, Otis had been my partner for years. Even though he told me he had no secrets and that Darnell was just trying to smear him, I could still sense that Otis was hiding something from me. Darnell's expression dimmed. You called me over just to ask that? I nodded. Darnell closed his eyes in pain. Yesterday, when Otis had just a scratch on his lip, you were so worried. But look at me, I'm beaten to a pulp, and you don't even care. You weren't like this before, Natalie. You used to care about me. Thinking about the information I had found online about Darnell's Playboy antics, I replied bluntly, maybe I was just blind back then. Darnell's expression grew even more pained. He smiled bitterly. I brought this on myself. I pressed him. What were you trying to tell me that night? Darnell said, it was nothing. I was just drunk and causing trouble. I'm sorry for disturbing you. Really? I scrutinized him. Darnell avoided my gaze and forced a smile. Yes, really. As I was about to walk past him, a woman's coquettish voice called out from nearby. Darnell. Don't walk so fast. Wait for me. When she reached us, she took one look at me and stumbled back, her face turning pale. Natalie. Are you a ghost? It was Sabina, the woman who had been entangled with Darnell for years. I had seen her information when I was searching for news about Darnell. Shut up. Of course, she's real. Darnell snapped, his face darkening. And can you stop following me? You make me sick. Sabina ignored him and continued to scream hysterically. You're alive. How are you still alive? Why are you still alive? Darnell frowned. This is a hospital. Can you stop making a scene? I had no interest in getting involved in their drama and turned to leave. As I rounded the corner, I saw Otis waiting for me. He took my hand. Let's go. Otis, you saw me talking to your brother just now, I said, studying his profile. Aren't you worried he'll badmouth you to me? I don't want any misunderstandings between us. If you have doubts, it's better to clear them up with him, Otis said calmly. Besides, I've done nothing wrong, so I have nothing to fear. Otis's confidence made me feel like I was overthinking things. A few days later, his father was discharged from the hospital. To celebrate, Otis held a family dinner, and Sabina showed up. Darnell frowned. Why is she here? Servants, get her out of here. Several staff members approached Sabina. Mr. Darnell doesn't want you here. Please leave. Sabina was furious. Darnell, you said you loved me. Why are you pushing me away? What does she have that I don't? When she was dead, you couldn't forget her. Now that she's alive, are you going to? Enough. Darnell glared at her, then turned to me, flustered. Natalie, don't listen to her nonsense. I broke up with Sabina 5 years ago. She's the one who keeps clinging to me. Sabina's face twisted in anger. She hadn't expected Darnell's first reaction to her outburst to be defending me. I was confused. 5 years ago was when I had my accident. Coincidentally, that was also when Darnell broke up with Sabina. Was my accident connected to them? Otis, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Enough. This is between you and Sabina. Don't drag Natalie into it. He gave Darnell and Sabina a cold look. Though his gaze was calm, it felt like a heavy weight pressing down on them, silencing them. Otis and I went to the living room. Even as we walked away, I could feel Sabina's venomous glare on me. I had a feeling this wasn't over. Sure enough, the day before Otis and I were set to leave for abroad, Sabina sent me a text. Natalie, don't think you've won. Your so-called happy life has been a complete lie from the start. I asked her what she meant. Sabina wanted to meet at a cafe, but I refused. I hadn't forgotten the hatred in her eyes that day. Curiosity kills the cat. While the truth was important, I had already died once. My safety mattered more. I figured Sabina hated me so much that she'd tell me the truth even if I didn't meet her. As expected, after I replied with "say what you want or don't," she sent me a file. The truth you want is in here. My rational side warned me that this was a Pandora's box. Opening it might shatter my happy life. But I didn't want to live as a fool. I opened the file. The truth that had been hidden from me for 5 years slowly unfolded. It turned out that my boyfriend wasn't Otis, but his brother, Darnell. My fall into the sea wasn't an accident, I had been kidnapped. When the kidnappers demanded a ransom, Darnell, lost in Sabina's embrace, chose not to save me. No wonder Darnell had been so desperate to tell me the truth when he was drunk. But when he sobered up, he avoided the topic. He was afraid I'd hate him if I knew the truth. And Otis, the man I trusted most, had deceived me the most. I gripped my phone tightly. My seemingly perfect life was built on lies, and now it was crumbling. I didn't regret learning the painful truth. Facing the pain was better than living as a fool. After all, pain fades with time, like a wound that eventually heals, even if the process is agonizing. Otis entered the room. He had already packed our luggage and, seeing me still sitting on the couch, didn't scold me for not packing. Instead, he asked gently, "Do you need me to help you pack?" Otis was as tender as ever, but now he felt like a stranger. "Otis," I called his name, "we need to talk." I showed him the file Sabina had sent me. Otis glanced at it and set it aside, his expression calm, as if he had been expecting this day. "Do you have anything to say?" Otis sighed softly. "Natalie, those aren't happy memories. It's better to forget them." I insisted, "This is my life. I have the right to know the truth. You were badly hurt back then. I was afraid that knowing the truth would break you. I wanted to wait until you were stronger before telling you. Later, I became selfish. I thought it would be nice if your heart belonged only to me." Otis explained calmly. "But I never planned to hide it from you forever. The day I brought you back home, I was prepared for you to find out." Otis was surprisingly candid, his eyes clear. The words of reproach on my lips suddenly felt hard to say. "So, who are you really to me?" Otis said we had grown up together and were very close. If nothing had happened, we would have gotten married. On my birthday, he had planned to confess his feelings to me but got into a car accident and was in a coma for 3 years. When he woke up, I was already Darnell's girlfriend. It took him 2 years to recover, and he had no intention of disrupting my life. But when he saw how unhappy I was, he came back for me and, by chance, saved me. "I just brought you back to the path you were meant to be on, Natalie." I whispered, were you so sure that if nothing had happened, I would have chosen you? We were meant to be. I belong to you, just as you belong to me. His tone was calm, but there was a hint of obsession beneath it. If you really had no feelings for me, you wouldn't have stayed with me, even if I told you I was your boyfriend, right? He had a point. But it didn't change the fact that my happiness was built on lies. I pressed my lips together, my face pale. I need some time to process all this. All right, we'll go home later. Otis, noticing how pale I was, poured me a glass of honey water. Natalie, I'm sorry. This time, I've hurt you. I turned my head away, avoiding his gentle gaze. I was afraid I'd soften too easily and forgive him. I met Darnell at a cafe. Otis had deceived me for 5 years without a single slip. I couldn't fully trust his confession. As soon as we met, I got straight to the point. Sabina told me about our past. So you know. Darnell smiled bitterly. You must hate me now. No, I've forgotten those things. I can't feel love or hate for them. My tone was flat. I just think you're disgusting. Darnell's face turned ashen. He said bitterly, I was deluding myself. I'm not even worthy of your hate. I felt nothing. What a scumbag. Where was all this regret when it mattered? Now he was putting on this pathetic act of devotion. Who was he trying to fool? I took a sip of coffee. Can you tell me about my past with Otis? Perhaps out of guilt, Darnell nodded. All right, I'll tell you everything. From Darnell, I confirmed that Otis hadn't lied to me this time. But I also learned something unexpected. After getting the information I needed from Darnell, I was about to leave when he stopped me. What else? Darnell looked at me hesitantly. He took a large gulp of coffee, as if steeling himself, and said, actually, you didn't just lose your memory once. I widened my eyes. What do you mean? Darnell explained, back then, when Otis had his accident and was in a coma, you were so distraught that you had a car accident on your way to see him. You were fine, but a blood clot in your brain caused you to lose all memories of Otis. I think your second memory loss was a result of that earlier injury. That's when I took advantage of the situation and pursued you. It took years, but I finally succeeded. But even though you had lost your memory, a part of you still remembered Otis. You'd cook the dishes he loved, and sometimes you'd accidentally call me Otis. It drove me crazy with jealousy, but there was nothing I could do. Then I met Sabina. She reminded me of you before the accident, bright, passionate. Most importantly, Sabina liked me, so I let her get close. I thought I didn't love you but just the type of girl you were. Later, I realized how wrong I was. You're irreplaceable. These years have been torture for me. I regret not saving you from the kidnappers. I've missed you so much. I've been relying on sleeping pills to get through the nights. Natalie, I'm sorry. Darnell covered his face, his expression filled with pain. Seeing him like this, I felt nothing but disgust. I raised my hand and slapped him twice. Darnell, you can lie to me, but don't lie to yourself. You're the one who deceived me, pursued me, and then hurt me without a second thought. Now you're putting on this act of devotion. Who do you think you're fooling? It's pathetic. Natalie, I really regret it. Once I realized my feelings, I broke up with Sabina. She's the one who kept clinging to me. I cut him off with a cold laugh. If you really loved me, you would have killed yourself after hearing I was dead. But look at you, you've been living just fine, eating well, sleeping well. I lost my life, but you lost your love. Did you think your apology would make me forgive you? Keep dreaming. I turned and left. Darnell, shaken by my words, staggered. He wanted to explain but couldn't find the words. I also realized that Otis was different to me. Both had deceived me, but I had no hesitation in slapping Darnell, while I calmly sought an explanation from Otis. Perhaps, as Otis had said, I loved him, whether before or after losing my memory. As I left the cafe and headed to the parking lot, a car suddenly sped toward me. The driver was Sabina. Her face was twisted with rage as she screamed, "Die!" It all happened too fast. I couldn't get out of the way in time. Just as the car was about to hit me, Darnell rushed over and pushed me out of the way. My world spun. When I came to, Darnell was lying on the ground, covered in blood. Sabina, her car crumpled against a pole, was trapped inside, screaming hysterically. Darnell, why did you save her? Do you love her that much? Darnell, blood pouring from his mouth, smiled at me. This time, I finally saved you. Chaos ensued. Police cars and ambulances arrived, their sirens blending into a cacophony of noise. Sabina was taken away by the police, still cursing me to die. Darnell was rushed into the emergency room. I called Otis. It was too complicated to explain over the phone, so I just told him Darnell was in the hospital and he needed to come immediately. Otis arrived quickly. He looked panicked and grabbed my shoulders. Are you okay? I shook my head. Your brother's the one who's hurt. He saved me. As long as you're okay. I was so worried about you on the way here. Otis hugged me tightly, as if trying to merge me into his very being. His cheek against my skin was cold, and his body trembled slightly. This was the first time I had seen him so shaken. When he had accompanied me during my rehabilitation, I had bitten his arm in frustration, leaving it bloody. Yet, he had remained calm, asking, "Do you feel better now?" After a while, Otis regained his composure and asked for details about what had happened between me, Darnell, and Sabina. I didn't hold back, telling him everything, including my conversation with Darnell. Otis's eyes turned cold. So, that's how he managed to be with you, through such despicable means. You did the same. It's different, Otis said softly, his hand gently caressing my face. You love me. Even if you lost your memory, loving me is instinctual for you, isn't it? No matter the deception, we were destined to be together. Let's make up. He paused. What? I said, Otis, I forgive you. In that moment when Sabina's car was about to hit me, all I could think about was what would happen to Otis and Elaine if I died. I realized I still loved Otis, whether before my first memory loss or after the second accident. So why torment myself and him, wasting precious time? There was only one thing I couldn't understand: you didn't have to lie to me. During my darkest and most desperate times, you were the one who stayed by my side for a year. Back then, you were the only light in my life. If you had confessed your feelings then, I would have definitely said yes. Otis replied, we had missed too many years together. I didn't want to wait, and I didn't dare to gamble. I'm sorry for deceiving you, but I don't regret it. Because he cared too much, he couldn't risk the slim chance of rejection. Finally, in a voice so soft it was almost inaudible, he added, Natalie, I'm not as good as you think I am. Otis had once told Natalie that when he woke up from his coma and learned she was with Darnell, he decided not to interfere in their lives, as they seemed happy. But in truth, Otis had never intended to let her go. From the moment he woke up, he had been plotting to take Natalie back from Darnell. Even if Natalie had seemed happy with Darnell at the time, the concepts of selflessness, blessing, and letting go didn't exist in his dictionary. Marriages could end in divorce, and Natalie and Darnell were only dating. Back then, Otis didn't know Natalie had lost her memory. He didn't resent her for being with Darnell during his coma, or for not visiting him for 3 years. He believed Natalie was too good a person, it must have been Darnell who kept her away. He was convinced of this. During his recovery, Otis kept a close eye on the woman he considered his. Though he was abroad, he had people secretly take photos of Natalie's daily life and send them to him. When Natalie was kidnapped, it was his people who discovered it in time and saved her. Later, as if fate were on his side, Natalie lost her memory. He finally became her boyfriend, and eventually, her husband. In his eyes, his brother was a fool. If it were him, he would never betray Natalie just because she had feelings for someone else. As long as he was the one by her side, that was enough. People needed to know when to be content. Excessive greed would only lead to ruin. If Natalie ever developed feelings for someone else, it would be that man's fault. All he had to do was quietly remove him. After the surgery, Darnell barely survived but lost both his legs and would spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Sabina, charged with attempted murder, was sent to prison. Darnell's family was furious at Sabina for ruining their son's life and took revenge on her family. Once a powerful family, they soon fell apart and went bankrupt. When Sabina was eventually released from prison, she would face a life of hardship. Before leaving, I went to see Darnell. The once proud young heir of a wealthy family now looked a decade older, his hair streaked with gray. His eyes were filled with weariness and despair. When he saw me, a glimmer of life returned to his gaze. "You came," he said, awkwardly covering his empty lower body with a blanket. "I don't regret saving you. To me, your well-being is more important than anything." Otis said coldly, "You should have saved her. If it weren't for you, she wouldn't have been targeted by Sabina in the first place." Darnell's expression darkened. He smiled bitterly. "You're right. If it weren't for me, she wouldn't have suffered so much. It's all my fault. Natalie, can you forgive me for what I've done?" I looked away. "It's all in the past." Seeing him like this, I didn't feel the need to talk about forgiveness anymore. I simply let go. After returning home, Otis and I resumed our peaceful life. One night, I suddenly remembered everything from the past. I dreamed of the birthday party years ago, when I learned Otis had been in a car accident and might not survive. I remembered how devastated and lost I had felt. That day, I had sensed Otis was going to confess his feelings to me. I wore my favorite dress, did my makeup, and asked a friend to capture what I thought would be one of the happiest moments of my life. But instead of his confession, I received news of his accident. My family situation was complicated. After my mother passed away, my father quickly remarried, and my grandfather took me in. I was already in my teens, mostly living at school, so I wasn't particularly close to my grandfather's family. Otis and I had grown up together, and he was the most important person in my life. I was overwhelmed with emotions, grief, panic, confusion, and my mind was a mess. On that rainy night, as I drove to see Otis, I got into a car accident. Later, I became entangled in that toxic relationship with Darnell. Otis was right. His lie had only brought me back to the path I was meant to be on. We were supposed to be together all along. "What's wrong, darling?" Otis woke up and saw me sitting with a small nightlight on, my back to him. "Nothing, just a bad dream," I mumbled. Otis gently patted my back, as if comforting a child. "It's okay. I'm here." I turned and hugged him. "Yes, you're here. Everything was just fine." The end.